Way back in 1943, right in the middle of World War II, two researchers published a paper that would, believe it or not, change the future. It wasn't about weapons or military strategy. It was about the very nature of our thoughts. And this whole revolution started with one single, incredibly bold question. Can a human thought actually be calculated? I mean, really think about that. Could the messy, complicated, beautiful firing of neurons inside our brain be broken down into simple, clean mathematical steps? Could you, in essence, build a machine that thinks? Now that sounds like a question we'd ask today, but they were asking it almost a century ago. And their answer was a pretty stunning yes. You had a neuroscientist, Warren McCulloch, and a logician, a young guy named Walter Pitts. Together, they published this paper with a mouthful of a title, A Logical Calculus of the Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity. What they proposed was this radical new bridge between the squishy, biological world of the brain and the rigid, structured world of mathematics. Okay, so let's really get into this core insight. How on earth did they make that leap? Well, it all starts not with computers, but with the basic biology of one single brain cell, the neuron. They zeroed in on this one key biological fact, known as the all-or-none principle. See, a neuron doesn't fire a little bit or a whole lot. It has a specific trigger point, a threshold. And once that threshold is hit, bam, it fires completely. It's basically a simple switch. It's either on or it's off. There's no dimmer here. And right here, this is the big eureka moment. McCulloch and Pitts realized that this binary state, this on or off, fire or don't fire, was exactly the same as the foundation of mathematical logic, true or false, 1 or 0. It was a perfect match. For the very first time, the chaotic activity inside our skulls could be described using a formal system where every statement is either definitely true or definitely false. Now, to build their system, their logical calculus, they had to simplify the neuron just a little bit. They boiled it down to its most essential job, being a switch. And to do that, they laid out 5 core assumptions that made the whole thing work. So here are the ground rules they set. First, the neuron is all or none. It's that simple switch. Second, it has a fixed threshold. It needs a specific number of yes votes from other neurons to fire. Third, the only delay that really matters is the tiny bit of time it takes a signal to jump from one neuron to the next. Fourth, an inhibitory signal is an absolute veto. It's a hard stop that prevents the neuron from firing, no matter what other signals it gets. And finally, for their model, the wiring is fixed. With these rules in place, the brain suddenly starts to look less like a mystery and more like a predictable, logical machine.
All right, so a single neuron is a simple switch. Big deal, right? Well, here's where it gets really, really powerful. What happens when you start wiring these simple switches together into networks? You can actually start to perform computations.
Let's actually try it. We can walk through a basic example that comes straight out of their 1943 paper. We're going to build an AND gate. This is one of the most fundamental operations in all of computing. It just means the output is true only if all of its inputs are true. So, take a look at this setup. You've got neuron C, and let's say it's a little bit picky. Its threshold is 2. That means it needs 2 incoming signals before it'll fire. So if only neuron A fires, nothing happens. If only neuron B fires, still nothing. But when neuron A and neuron B fire at the same time, neuron C hits its threshold and, boom, it activates. You've just built a biological AND gate. And what's so amazing about this is how flexible it is. By just changing one tiny little parameter, we can create a totally different logical function. So let's try another one. Let's build an OR gate. The wiring is exactly the same, but notice the crucial difference. Neuron C's threshold is now just 1. It's much easier to impress. So now, if neuron A fires, C activates. If neuron B fires, C also activates. And of course, if they both fire, C still activates. It fires if A or B fires. And once you can build these simple gates, you can start combining them into networks that can perform unbelievably complex calculations. But this brings up a pretty big question, right? A simple circuit that just takes an input and gives an output? Well, that has no memory of the past. So how does a system like this remember anything? The paper's next big idea tackles exactly that. The authors pointed out this really important difference between 2 kinds of networks. The simple ones we just looked at, they don't have any circles, or what we'd call feedback loops. The signal just flows in one direction, from input to output. But what happens if you wire the network so that a signal can actually loop back on itself? A network without circles is just a simple reflex. Its output depends only on what's happening right now. But in a network with circles, a signal can loop back around, kind of reverberating through the circuit and keeping itself active. The paper called this regenerative activity. It means the network's current state is influenced by its own past activity. And that is the biological basis for memory. It's literally a thought being held in the mind. So why does this 80-year-old theoretical paper matter so much today? Because this wasn't just some clever analogy they came up with. It ended up being a literal blueprint for the future. This idea that you could take networks of simple on-off switches and make them perform any logical calculation was the exact theoretical foundation needed to build digital computers. They had, in effect, described the core principles of digital circuits years before the technology to actually build them even existed. I mean, you can draw a straight line from this 1943 paper to the device you're watching this on. Just 2 years later, the legendary John von Neumann cites their work in his design for modern computer architecture. Fast forward to 1956, and it's a key inspiration at the conference that officially coined the term artificial intelligence. And today, it is the bedrock concept behind every single modern neural network. And if that wasn't enough, here's the final, truly mind-bending piece of the puzzle. The authors showed that their neural nets were computationally universal. In simple terms, that means these networks could, in principle, compute anything that any other computer could compute, as defined by Alan Turing's groundbreaking work. They had connected the biology of the human brain to the absolute theoretical limits of computation itself. It's just staggering. This quote from the paper's conclusion really captures just how huge their claim was. They weren't just talking about engineering or math. They were turning psychology on its head. The mind was no longer this mysterious, unknowable, ghostly thing. It was a physical, computational process, something that could be understood, analyzed, and, in the case of mental illness, potentially even fixed. And that brings us to the final lingering question that this paper leaves us with. If our thoughts can be described by logical calculus, if our minds are at their core just incredibly elaborate biological computers following a set of predictable rules, what does that really mean for the idea of free will? That's the question their paper forced us to ask in 1943, and it's one we are still grappling with today.